Instead of creating this pivot table using all these case whens or filters, we can use an extension in Postgres called crosstab. So it's a crosstab function. This is a Postgres specific function that doesn't exist in other databases. Well, other databases have equivalent of this, but it doesn't work exactly this way, and it might not be called crosstab. Although crosstab is a fairly common name for this type of analysis. Other databases might use the name something like pivot or something too. But anyway, to run a crosstab function, what we need to do is we need to actually call this, or we need to create this extension within our database. So you need to run this statement, create extension table function. So when I run that, I'm going to get an error message here saying that this already exists, but the first time you run it, you should not get that error message. Then when we run the crosstab function is going to go within a regular select statement. So in the from clause, that's where we're going to get the crosstab. So it's almost like we're running a subquery here, but we're passing in something to the crosstab function and then passes back a result set that then goes into our select statement. The select statement we are going to pass into crosstab, so this piece right here, this select statement has to conform to some very specific restrictions. It has to have 3 columns, first of all, that select statement, or it has to return 3 columns. The first column should be the identifier of each row. So what is going to identify a row in our new pivot table? So in our example from above, that would have been the year. The second column should represent the categories that's going to be in the pivot table. So in our example, these categories are the month. However many unique values are in this field or in this column, that's how many columns we are going to end up getting in our pivot table later. And then finally, the third column in the select statement is the actual values that we are going to be aggregating together to go into the different columns and rows. So this, in our example, that would be monthly sales. So if we look at our example, we need to have output that shows year in the first column, month in the second column, and then sales values in the third column. So let's go ahead and look at what that actually looks like. So this is what we're going to have to create later. And we're going to be creating this more slowly. I just want to show what that looks like. So I'm getting an error message saying near the parenthesis. So let's take a look at that. So over here in sales in millions, I don't have quotation marks around the name. So I'm going to have to add that. If we run this, this is what the input into the crosstab function should look like. And of course, this is for our specific example, but this format is what it needs to follow no matter what. So we need to have a column that's going to indicate the rows. So the unique values in this column are going to become the rows in the crosstab. The unique values in here are going to define the columns. And then here are the values that should be aggregated together by a sum or by some sort of function. All right, so if we go back up to our description of crosstab then, as I said before, the crosstab function is called within the from clause. And then in addition to this select statement, we also need to define the categories that we're going to be grouping based on. The first piece here, the select statement, is fairly standard for the crosstab function. The second piece of actually defining column names and column categories, that depends a little bit on, we can do that in a few different ways. But in our specific example, the categories that we're going to be using to group by are month in the numeric values. We have 1, 2, 3, and so on, all the way up to 12. However, we don't want that to be our field names. We want our field names to be January something, like January sales or something like that. So our field names don't match our categories that we're going to be used to group by. So that makes it a little bit trickier to call the crosstab function. But how you do that in this specific instance is that you pass in a select statement with a list of distinct values that are used to group the rows into different columns. And this can be done in different ways. We could create a select statement that pulls all the distinct values out of our actual data, or we can create some sort of list that is a little bit faster to run that only generates 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And then as far as for the column names, this we can just hard code the name, and then we also need to define what data type goes into that column. So you got to be very specific with how you set up the crosstab, but then it's quite easy to run it. But it's a little tricky to get it to kind of work and get the right inputs into it. But if you follow just instructions, at least if you have a problem that's similar to this, you should be able to follow these and kind of copy and paste your code into this kind of template. So let's go ahead and actually change this code into a report that is created using that crosstab function. So the first thing we're going to do is to rewrite the select statement in 11. So we're going to copy that and then paste it into here. And we want to rewrite that so that simply returns 3 columns instead of all these 12 columns. But we want to have a year column, and then we want to have a month column. So I'm going to go ahead and just simply do sales month as month. And then we want to have actual sales. So we're going to do round sum sales, and then we're going to take out the filter because we want just sales as a total. And let's call that sales. And we're going to get rid of all these other columns because we only want 3 columns in our output. And then let's see this from statement here. We do need sales month, we need sales year. I guess we could probably just simply call sales. No, that's fine. So that calculates sales, and here we aggregate it and we round it. So that's fine. And then we're going to still need to call from these 2. And then we don't want to group by just sales year here now. We need to group by sales month, because if we only group by sales year, we're only going to get 12 rows. And in this input that goes into the crosstab, we need 1 row for each year and each month that are then going to be repivoted. So I'm going to say sales month, and then let's go ahead and run this to see if we get what we wanted from this. All right, so we have year and we have month, and then we have the values. And in addition here, this looks like it's sorted correctly. And it's really important that it's sorted by this column and then this column. So almost always when we send into crosstab, we simply do order by just to make sure that it will get sorted order by correctly. And I'm just going to do order by 1, comma 2, which orders it by column 1 and then column 2. Okay, and that didn't change anything. But see here, if I change this to 3, then not resorts it based on the 3rd column first and then the 2nd column. But that's not what we want. We want it to be 1. So if we run that again, we get back to the result. So this is what we're going to pass into crosstab. Let's go ahead and copy this. And then let's see, we're going to copy this part of it. We don't want to copy the semicolon. All right, and then we're going to replace this. We're going to have the single quotation marks around it because we're sending in a string that represents the select statement. That's what we're passing into the function. Now we can indent this to make it look a little bit more readable. And then now what's the next thing? Select statement with list of distinct values. And we can approach this a few different ways. A fairly generic way that's going to work for doesn't matter if you have 12 months or if you have something else, is to just select from the original data, select distinct values using the distinct function. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So we're going to select distinct, and I'm going to uncomment that so I can see my code here. Select distinct, we want the month, so I'm going to extract month from order date. And that's from the order head, sales order header table. And let's go ahead and put this on separate row. Select distinct, extract from sales order header, and get rid of these results so we can see the code a little bit better. And then importantly here too, we need to order by the column or the categories we're sending back. So order by 1. And then we get rid of all this because this was the template's placeholder. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this select statement to see what we get. And we now get a list of all the unique categories that we want to group based on as far as what's going to go into the columns. And then the next thing is the column names and the data type for each one of the columns. Oh, and I want to get this into a string again, so I'm going to go ahead and move that up before I start working on the column names. I'm going to make it kind of easy on myself, so I'm going to just say January here, and then the data type I'm going to say numeric. And the name should be within quotation mark, and then I'm going to copy this, and we need 12 in total of these. And then this is going to become February, March, April, May, June, July. And I don't want a comma here after the last. So 1, 2, and then let's go ahead and run this and see what happens. So we got some syntax error at end of input. So let's see, we got a quotation mark here, quotation mark there, comma. I forgot to define the first column, which is my year column. Actually, I'm going to do that as an integer. And then let's go ahead and try to run it now. Still getting an error here. Oh, I'm running both. I only want to run my crosstab. Getting an error message. So it looks like here I have a parenthesis here that I don't want. See if that took care of the error. And now we have our crosstab report here. So I have our rows of different years, and then we have all these different column names with the values we had before.